Great Lakes of East Africa. A jewel in the African crown.
This is just incredible. Straight away you can see why this part of Africa has drawn people for thousands and thousands of years.
It's an area dominated by the largest tropical lake in the world, Lake Victoria.
Even from up here, its scale is hard to grasp, but the fertility of the land around is clear to see.
For centuries, people have fished these plentiful waters and cultivated the rich soil. But such abundance has brought with it strife. This region has been the site of intense rivalry and great power struggles. And it's a place whose history is still shrouded by legend and myth. We know less about Africa's past than almost anywhere else on Earth. But the scarcity of written records doesn't mean Africa lacks history. That can be found in the artifacts, culture, and in the traditions of the people. In this series, I'm exploring some of the most vibrant histories in the world. I've come to Uganda to find out how centuries of conflict have shaped this region of Africa. This is a tale of two kingdoms, a story of rivalry, of warfare, of opportunism. For over 200 years, the kingdoms of Bunyoro and Buganda jostled for position, competing for valuable resources and using history and mythology to make a claim on the land. For centuries, the interior of East Africa was unknown to the Western world. But that changed in the 1860s, thanks to a geographical puzzle that had been the obsession of Europeans for decades. The European adventurers were all desperate to claim the glory that would come with the supposed discovery of one particular place. The accolade went to a young British soldier named John Hanning Speke. In 1862, he claimed he had discovered the source of the River Nile.
Right now we are going to the source, where the source of the Nile begins from.
Speke had searched East Africa for 6 years, hoping to solve the mystery of where the Nile began. He was finally able to tell the outside world that the River Nile flowed out of Lake Victoria. A guide, James Bukoma, is taking me to the spot where the water starts its 4,132-mile journey to the Mediterranean. So this is the source of the Nile, James?
This is the real point where the Nile gets the water from the lake. This is exactly where the Nile begins.
This is the source?
Here.
But the significance of Speke's adventure went far beyond the confirmation of where the Nile began. His journal is the earliest first-hand account of Buganda, the kingdom he found here. His excitement is plain from his description of Buganda's king, Mutesa I. A more theatrical sight I never saw. The king, a good-looking tall young man, was sitting on a red blanket, scrupulously well-dressed in a new mbugu. On his neck was a very neat ornament. Not a fault could be found with the taste of his getting up. The writing might sound condescending today, but European adventurers provided historians with valuable testimony. It's easy to question the methods and motives of explorers like Speke today. But I do think that they were amazed by the sophistication of the kingdoms that they encountered here in this region. Speke was captivated by the beauty of the landscape. But it was Buganda itself that was perhaps the biggest surprise to him. He'd stumbled upon an advanced kingdom with complex structures of government. It had a road network, established trade, and an organized and well-armed military. At the end of the 19th century, Buganda's power was reflected in a map drawn up by the British. It recognized Buganda's dominant position on the northwestern shores of Lake Victoria, overshadowing its neighbor, the Kingdom of Bunyoro, just half its size and on the banks of Lake Albert. Today, both kingdoms are provincial powers within the modern state of Uganda. But the country's capital, Kampala, is Buganda's traditional power base. And the current king's palace overlooks the city from a prominent hilltop, as his predecessors did. The fact that Uganda gets its name from Buganda shows the kingdom's historic influence, but it doesn't tell the full story. Buganda established itself at the expense of its neighbor, Bunyoro. 400 years ago, it was Bunyoro which was the region's major power, while Buganda was then an insignificant group of lakeside communities. Somehow, the Bugandans managed to turn the tables on Bunyoro, displace it as the most powerful kingdom in this part of Africa.
To understand how Buganda came to oust Bunyoro, you have to know more of the history of Bunyoro itself.
I want to find out how Bunyoro first became a major power, and then how Buganda overtook it so dramatically. I'm traveling to Hoima, the Bunyoro capital.
Compared to Kampala, Hoima's a fairly modest place. But when Bunyoro was at its height in the 17th century, this was a major trading centre.
It may be hard to see now, but 400 years ago, Bunyoro was a place of considerable political, religious, and economic significance. Yulamu Nsamba is a court historian and the private secretary to the current king of Bunyoro.
Bunyoro was powerful as a trading country. Hoima was a market town. There used to be a king's market here. It was quite a busy place. And goods sold used to be locally made and also from long distance trade. There was a long distance trade route from Lake Albert through the Sudan to Cairo and beyond. In fact, there were several markets scattered all over the kingdom, and there would be routes linking them.
And how did Bunyoro actually build on its economic successes?
Well, Bunyoro built on its economic successes in terms of expansion, in terms of building an infrastructure. It was a big organized state. Although the borders kept on shifting, we know that from the clan affiliations and the scattering of the clans, you find that Bunyoro's clans are in places as far away as southern Tanzania.
So there was a kind of political sophistication that had never really existed before in this region.
Yes, there was for sure.
The clan chiefs were the recognized custodians of the land. As a result, they wielded significant power. So Bunyoro needed strong kings to keep them in check and to keep the kingdom stable.
This is the throne room of the kings.
The palace throne room is filled with objects designed to make the monarch the focus of the kingdom and to underline the history of its ascent.
When a king sits here, for the first time, he's handed a number of articles to signify what his office is all about. One of the articles he's handed is a traditional hammer. That puts him in office as a head of all the metal workers in his kingdom. He is also handed a traditional hoe. And the message is, encourage your subjects to grow food. People should not starve. That's why you are a king.
So all of these different things that they tell a particular kind of story, or they each add a different element to the story of Bunyoro.
Each item here has a story to tell.
The hoe, the hammer, the iron spears, they indicate aspects of the kingdom's power. But underpinning it all was something much greater.
The kingdom of Bunyoro reached its height during the course of the 16th and 17th centuries, and it did so in part due to one crucial factor. Bunyoro claimed that it was directly descended from an ancient empire more powerful than any other in the region.
It was called Kitara. According to oral history, Kitara had been a vast empire ruled by a powerful dynasty known as the Twezi. Historians still disagree about whether Kitara or its Twezi rulers ever existed. But even today, the people of Bunyoro revere the Twezi as gods. Every week, dozens of people from towns and villages throughout the region travel to worship at a Twezi shrine. I've joined them on their pilgrimage to Mbendi Hill. This sacred tree stands on what some believe to have been an ancient Twezi settlement.
Within each one of these buttresses is a different sub-shrine. And I think each one of these sub-shrines is dedicated to a different kind of prayer.
The presiding spirit of the shrine is a Twezi matriarch named Nakayima. Worshippers make offerings of money, coffee beans and milk as they ask for answers to their prayers.
This obviously really matters to people. I mean, the potency of this. This isn't a tradition frozen in aspect. This is still alive and well and celebrated.
Since the earliest days of the Bunyoro kingdom in the 15th century, there seems to have been a strong belief in the Twezi, whether or not they ever existed.
There are those who think that they are real people who existed in this part of the region, which was called Kitara. But other interpretations also refer to the Batwezi as spirits, because their legacy was perpetrated through the worship of the Batwezi cult, which is what we are now witnessing.
Dr. Ephraim Kamuhangari has researched the Twezi dynasty.
What's the significance of this Twezi ritual to the success of Bunyoro?
It is the strength of the religion that actually boosted the political claim of the new rulers.
So it legitimizes them?
Yes.
This relationship with ancient Twezi?
The relationship is the legitimacy they claimed from the former rulers of Kitara that actually strengthened their control over the new kingdom of Bunyoro.
Bunyoro's claim to such an illustrious pedigree was vital. It gave its people a proud heritage, and it meant the kingdom could assert control over the land once ruled by Kitara. The fact that the Twezi were regarded as otherworldly gave Bunyoro a spiritual foundation. That belief continues to resonate.
And this place is obviously still very special. Even in modern history, people have sought to make a connection with this place. And today, it obviously still means an awful lot to a lot of people.
Faith in the Twezi has lasted over the centuries for good reason. There's physical evidence that suggests the predecessors of Bunyoro may not be figments of the imagination. The Uganda Museum is one of the oldest in East Africa. It houses a range of extraordinary artifacts. Some historians say they prove the existence of the Twezi. They may also cast light on the early days of Bunyoro. I persuaded the curator, Jacqueline Nyirachiza, to show me some of the treasures that fill the shelves behind the scenes.
This is the store, archaeologist room.
Oh, Jackie, I love places like this.
The contents of these boxes all come from a place called Ntuzi. It was a vast settlement, and possibly the home of the Twezi. Some even say that Ntuzi was the capital of the legendary kingdom of Kitara.
And how old is this, Jackie?
We think that it's like 700 years ago.
700.
Yeah, because these sites have been in existence like 700 to 900 years ago.
I mean, the glorious thing about it is that you can see how someone has pushed into the still drying surface a piece of cloth.
And
it gives a sense.
This must be street roulette,
yes.
Yes, which is still dated in the same period.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I just have this thing about ceramics. I mean, this idea that someone actually created and used this thing, which should have been quite humble, but it's just absolutely exquisitely beautiful. Gives you a real sense of what ordinary people's lives were like during this period. Yeah. Because for so much African history, you don't get a sense of the ordinary. It's the kings, it's the powerful, but this is just beautiful.
Along with the pottery, beads and iron spearheads have also been recovered. The finds reveal that the predecessors of Bunyoro had themselves developed an advanced civilization.
These were complex cultures. These are water vases, but also that these are very, very sophisticated vessels, some of them. Some of them used for storage, for foods that would have meant that people travelled, that they traded. And this just gives us a small insight into Ntuzi.
The civilization at Ntuzi would have been a significant foundation for the kingdom of Bunyoro. But Ntuzi also provides evidence for the secret of Bunyoro's success, the reason it became the most powerful kingdom in the region. I'm heading to Ntuzi to see it for myself. Ntuzi lies in the grasslands of central Uganda, 95 miles south of Bunyoro's capital, Hoima.
This region isn't in Bunyoro, according to modern maps, but at its height, this whole area belonged to the Bunyoro kingdom.
And it was here, at a time when most historians thought Kitara and their Twezi rulers was simply a myth, that a discovery was made that forced them to reconsider.
When archaeologists began excavating these sites in the 1920s, they couldn't quite believe what they were unearthing. An ancient organised society that dated back 1,000 years.
Hidden underneath the dense vegetation are important clues to the foundations of the Bunyoro kingdom. Archaeologist Dismas Ongwen has carried out excavations at this site.
Everywhere you move, you see the archaeology of the area. And everywhere you go, you find either iron slug like this, you find pottery. Yeah, just look over here. You find there's massive evidence of pottery.
There are artifacts strewn for miles around. But archaeologists were fascinated to find a dense concentration of material at two ancient rubbish dumps.
Too old for this.
In oral history, they're referred to as the male and female mounds. for reasons that remain a bit of a mystery.
Some people think it's a female mound because it was the female dumping the rubbish here, and some academia people think that it's basically the female mound because it's smaller than the male mound. In Africa, people think that being big is being a male.
And what was the bulk of the material found here?
We have pottery, we have bones, we have iron artifacts, we have beads.
Archaeologists can tell from the volume and age of the material that this area was densely populated from the 11th century to around the 1400s. That dates Ntuzi to just before Bunyoro is thought to have been established. It also coincides with their putative predecessors, the Twezi.
Yeah, this is a proper example of the archaeology of the area.
But some of the most significant finds aren't man-made.
Just look at this, it's a big piece of bone.
And they've been revealed to archaeologists almost by accident.
If you look at it from what is happening here, the running water is actually eroding up the topsoil and it's leaving the archaeology. And I'm pretty sure that much of it has been washed off. So the water erosion is actually exposing the archaeology of the area.
The erosion has uncovered the centuries-old remains of cattle among the pottery and other objects.
It's quite amazing. Yeah, there's quite a lot of cattle bones around here. And you find it's all mixed up. Jaws, teeth, horns, and it's everything.
It is very special just picking up something like this that may have been part of a herd of cattle, perhaps 800 or 1,000 years ago, that actually moved across this landscape. I mean, obviously it's changed a lot, but not so much. I mean, there are still people here working with cattle. It's just very special.
The presence of cattle bones here is hugely significant. It gives a clear indication of the wealth of Ntuzi society, which the kingdom of Bunyoro is likely to have inherited. The animal bones also tell archaeologists a great deal about the lives of the people.
First of all, these were cattle herders, and they are looking after cattle in big numbers. And actually, if you look at some of the bones that we find around, we find there is evidence that they were actually slaughtering the younger bulls. That means they were doing it selectively, maybe to promote a particular breed of animals that they had. So these people were actually very smart in what they are doing.
Most communities in East Africa at this time would have shared just 1 or 2 cows. Evidence at Ntuzi shows that Bunyoro's predecessors had vast numbers of cattle. It might explain why a belief endured in the kingdom that the Twezi had been great providers. Bunyoro continued the pastoral tradition that had been established in the centuries before the kingdom's rise to power. They probably would have been tending herds of a breed like these Ankoli cattle. The extraordinary volume of livestock made Bunyoro unusual.
There was a reason why Bunyoro could maintain vast herds of cattle. The Bunyoro had a mineral that was vital for the welfare of people and cattle alike. The Bunyoro had salt.
Lake Albert sits on the western edge of modern Uganda. According to legend, the Twezi people disappeared into it, but not before they discovered the wealth that surrounded it.
Bunyoro may have claimed its legitimacy from ancient Kitara, but its economic power wasn't mythical, it was very real.
The hot springs that flow into this lake provided Bunyoro's valuable mineral, salt, essential to all animal life, enabled the kingdom to grow in strength. Healthy herds, in turn, provided more food and helped the kingdom to prosper.
Good morning. How does this work? So you're just scraping the top layer of soil? Okay, lovely. So in this is the salt? The salt is actually in here? It smells a little bit sulphury, but obviously that this is very valuable material, this earth. And this for hundreds of years has served these women and these communities incredibly well.
The production of ash salt here at Kibero on Lake Albert's shores is thought to date back some 900 years. This occupation is hereditary and is carried out exclusively by women.
I hope I'm helping rather than hindering your work. Oh yeah, I'm obviously hindering it. There's real skill in this. I just don't happen to have it. And the thing to understand is it's very warm. And doing this sort of work day after day under these kinds of conditions, it must be pretty tough work.
The salty soil is gathered and dried in the sun for about a week before being mixed with water and left to percolate. The resulting liquid is boiled to produce ash salt. The same earth is leached over and over again, making this an unusually sustainable technique that produces salt of the very highest quality.
This has probably gone on unchanged for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years on this very spot. This is a valuable product coming right up out of the very ground itself. And this salt was just so important to the success of the Bunyoro kingdom.
The kingdom's control of salt fields, both at Kibero and further south at Katwe, allowed them to build both a stable economy and in turn a strong political base. Without salt, Bunyoro almost certainly would never have become the great kingdom that it did. Bunyoro produced volumes of salt far greater than the local population would have needed. The surplus helped to establish a vitally important network of trade in the region, which was controlled by the state. Today, the merchandise is prepared in exactly the same way as it's always been.
And this is the final stage of salt production, when these beautiful conicals of salt are produced, ready to go off to market.
Salt was a much sought-after commodity. When Bunyoro was at its height in the 1600s, salt was as valuable as any precious metal. Compared to the rest of Africa, this region was cut off from the outside world until relatively late. But historians believe Bunyoro's salt still travelled long distances. The kingdom supplied the Great Lakes area with salt. And via the regional trade network, Bunyoro's salt may have eventually reached the foreign merchants on Africa's east coast.
An economy was emerging. Bunyoro was wheeling and dealing.
Bunyoro was a kingdom with much to celebrate. As trading evolved and markets grew, the people of the Bunyoro kingdom turned to their traditional crafts for more commodities to sell. Bunyoro's metalcraft was renowned. Its blacksmiths made the king's symbolic hammer and hoe, and there was a demand for Bunyoro's iron products throughout the region. The blacksmith's expertise is acknowledged at festivals such as this one, which celebrates the lunar cycle.
The new moon rises at midnight tonight, and it's a time of renewal. It's meant to be a period when the women menstruate, but it's also a time when the blacksmiths have special power.
Not only did the blacksmiths conjure iron from the earth, they created the weapons required to defend the kingdom of Bunyoro. by its height in the 17th century, Bunyoro's assets were the envy of its neighbours. Thanks to the power of the king and the strong clan chiefs, Bunyoro's influence stretched over a vast territory. The resources that provided the basis for its power also connected the people to their environment. And the claim of Kitara and Twezi ancestry legitimized Bunyoro's authority and gave the kingdom a strong sense of identity.
But on the other side of the country, on the banks of Lake Victoria, another kingdom had begun to flourish, thanks to a crop that would not just change the future of this region, but of the whole of the African continent.
The kingdom of Buganda began as small groups of clans who cultivated land by Lake Victoria. Their metamorphosis from a handful of communities to a powerful kingdom was thanks in part to a humble food crop, the banana. The high rainfall and fertile land of Lake Victoria's northern shores had encouraged the clans of Uganda to settle here in the first place around the 15th century. By the 1600s, a cohesive state had emerged, the result of organized cultivation of its most important crop.
Bunyoro had its salt, but the bananas of Buganda would create a kingdom that would challenge Bunyoro's dominance once and for all.
So we're going this way?
We're going this way. So these are the banana trees. Ah, bananas at last, Sempek. I was beginning to worry that we'd missed the season, because this is obviously that most of them are in harvest already.
The clans of Buganda grew bananas in the fields and caught fish in the lake. It's a nutritious diet and one which helped their population to grow.
There are over 50 varieties of banana grown in Uganda, but this one, the plantain or the matoke, is the most important. For the people who live here, the banana is both meat and drink. How wonderful. So the whole tree has to come down to harvest the banana. You get a sense of how important these are, that they're not just crops to be eaten.
For the Buganda people of the 17th and 18th centuries, the banana was revolutionary. It not only fed them, but its leaves thatched their houses, its fibrous stalks were used to make cord, and its stems were used to build their defences.
Lirina omugaso munene nnyo kwegamba mu bulamu bwaffe nga ffe Abaganda. Gamba lituwa amaanyi ffe, oba lituwa amaanyi, lituwoomera nnyo nnyo nnyo, mmere tuwoomera nnyo eno.
The banana and its related products quickly became commodities, which the clans of Buganda traded in the regional economy, just as Bunyoro had done with salt. And it's still part of the staple diet of the region today.
I've had plantain before, but this is matoke, cooked the traditional Ugandan way. I can't wait. Oh, what a glorious smell. Oh, that looks lovely. It's very delicious. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Liwooma munnange bwe lityo.
As Buganda's economy grew, structures of government developed. The early clan chiefs held much power, with the king merely the most senior among them. But gradually, power centralized with the monarch, and he became much more than the first among equals. The loyalty of the clans was assured, however. The king took wives from different clans, meaning his successor could come from any clan in the kingdom. And the clans remained vitally important to Buganda. Today, more than 50 clans exist in Buganda. Each takes an emblem from the natural world. These men are from the Mushroom Clan. The role of Buganda's clans now is to safeguard the kingdom's cultural heritage. Drums are particularly treasured as they are believed to hold the spirit of the nation.
None of us has lived as long as these drums. So what they tell is something of such a long time ago that you wouldn't want to let go of in your lifetime.
Mr. Gombe is the custodian of his clan's drums. They aren't only used as a method of communication. Each clan is identified by a unique rhythm.
For you to have an identity, you have to have a drum, because it is on that drum that you sound who you are. Aye. Aye. Yeah. Ekabolokota, ekabolokota, egwande. Ekabolokota, ekabolokota, egwande. Bamala okulya tetwalyanga. Bamala okulya tetwalyanga. So balyanga. And so on and so forth.
And how important are drums for Buganda?
They mean a lot to us, but most important, they remind us of our ancestry.
The clan structure was hereditary, but the increasingly powerful kings also appointed chiefs. That engendered a competitive spirit among Buganda's ambitious young men, as well as their loyalty. The 18th century Buganda had a stable economic base and a growing centralized government. It was self-confident and ambitious, keen to make the most of its resources and perhaps also to reinforce a sense of nationhood. It chose a special cloth which was associated with Buganda royalty.
Come down here to Nsangwa. There's a family down here who've been making bark cloth for Buganda kings for generations. I'm going to see how they do it.
Bark cloth is made from various types of fig tree. It has long been a symbol of the Kingdom of Buganda. Omutaka Kabugoza is the official maker of royal bark cloth.
Abekika ekyengonge ffe twazuula omutuba ogukoma gwako. Era ne kabaka bw'afa era nze mpaayo olubugo olusumika okumusumikira ng'olugoye.
Bark cloth provided kings and clan chiefs with a visible symbol of the Buganda nation.
So you take off the outer bark,
the outer bark,
and then it's the inner bark that you actually want, which actually creates.
This one is
bark
the one we want. Yeah, that's the cloth itself.
Yeah. Wow, it's very thick and rubbery.
Yeah.
But this isn't the finished cloth. This is
just the beginning of the harvesting.
The value of bark cloth was more than symbolic. During the second half of the 18th century, Buganda's people were encouraged to wear it, not just the chiefs and royalty. A nationwide industry took off, and the material was renowned among Buganda's neighbours.
It's lovely work to do because the results are just so immediate. You can see the fibres already beginning to separate and widen, and it's beginning to feel a little bit more like cloth.
The desire to increase bark cloth production had a profound effect. Buganda expanded its territory to acquire new lands on which to plant fig trees, and its aggressive approach to commerce meant its influence in the region grew.
It's actually products like bark cloth that allow Buganda to forge a cultural identity. But it also allows them to participate in new emerging economies.
The state capitalized on the productivity of the people. Taxation paid for a network of roads that pushed Buganda's commerce further afield. And the kingdom took advantage of its geography in other ways. Buganda's position on the northern shore of Lake Victoria gave it access to the burgeoning trade routes to the east coast of Africa.
The fiercely competitive kingdom of Buganda was now ready to take any advantage to aid its growth.
Control of trade over the lake was critical if Buganda was to increase its power and influence in the region.
The kingdom built up a vast royal navy of canoes, just like this one. Each one could carry between 60 and 100 men.
The enormous vessels that the craftsmen built were put to good use. The fleet was used to conquer islands and new territory along the shore. The kingdom's navy also escorted traders from the east coast directly to Buganda, ensuring the kingdom controlled the lion's share of new commerce coming into the region. In the mid-19th century, the first foreign traders arrived. Swahili and Arab merchants were interested in ivory and slaves. It was a significant moment in Buganda's history, according to Professor Ndabeza.
The arrival of Swahili and Arab traders from the East African coast had great impact. One, they brought in guns that tilted the balance of power in favor of Buganda because it controlled that trade from the East African coast. Two, they brought in goods that had not been in this region and were sought after. So the Buganda kingdom controlled this new trade.
So this was a formidable culture, both in terms of trading, but also in terms of military might.
It was actually an organized state that could organize law and order and had at one time a standing army, and it could defend the lives and property of its people. So it was a state, although not exactly in the modern sense of the word, but it was a state that could organize such a big force, feed it, and manage to control it and command it. The point, however, is that Buganda kingdom could amass such a force in that period without any external assistance, which demonstrates that Africans, before the coming in of foreigners, were organized and could amass a standing army of such a big force and deploy it at any one time.
This sophisticated kingdom had shown that it would use its resources to further its own interests.
A predatory politics was emerging. Buganda had the power to take what it wanted from its neighbours at will. Valuable export commodities like ivory were collected. Buganda was on the make.
For 200 years, Buganda had lived in the shadow of its more powerful neighbour, Bunyoro. Now Buganda was ready to seize any opportunity to replace Bunyoro as the region's greatest kingdom. While the kingdom of Buganda had developed and grown, Bunyoro had also continued to trade and prosper. But unlike its neighbour, Bunyoro had not centralised political power, and the clan chiefs still held a great deal of authority. The structure of Bunyoro's royal succession meant that the clan chiefs could contest the throne. The kingdom became mired in a series of internal divisions and wars of succession. the once great kingdom was in decline. Buganda exploited its rival's weakness. It began occupying Bunyoro's more vulnerable territories.
With a combination of their strategic lakeside position and their unrivaled military power, Buganda seemed unstoppable.
Buganda seized land that cut off Bunyoro from the lake and from the lucrative trade that crossed it.
Then, around 1830, a shattering blow. Bunyoro lost crucial territory that would weaken the kingdom as never before. Bunyoro lost its salt.
The chiefs of the Toro province declared it an autonomous kingdom. Its territory included Bunyoro's most valuable salt fields.
It was a devastating blow to the economy of the kingdom. But whilst Bunyoro threatened to fall apart, Buganda was ever stronger.
The days of growing banana crops and expanding their plantations had instilled the notion of communal effort in Buganda. At the height of the kingdom's power, it was able to marshal its people and resources to act in the national interest. But its neighbour Bunyoro was not about to give up the fight.
These are the tombs of King Kabalega, remembered as one of the greatest kings this country ever knew.
In 1869, Kabalega took the Bunyoro throne. He rallied the kingdom's forces and began pushing Buganda back to its original borders.
Oh, this place. And there's a real poignancy to this gravesite. He's actually buried down in a chamber beneath here. But up at the top level, you can see that they've marked the spot with 9 hoes. And I think iron is so important to people here. It's just wonderful. These are his personal effects. There are things like spears. There are shields that would have been used in battle. This was a man who, he fought for this place himself.
Kabalega reinforced the trade routes that brought firearms into Bunyoro. That strengthened the kingdom and challenged Buganda's trade position. His actions gave him heroic status.
I think because he brought a kind of renewed sense of confidence to Bunyoro. It was a sort of last stand. And obviously he's still loved. I mean, look, these things are still venerated. And in a way they tell the story of Bunyoro.
Under Kabalega, Bunyoro was once again a force to be reckoned with. The kingdoms were toe-to-toe. And into this volatile situation, new players arrived, the European explorers. John Hanning Speke's 1862 account of Buganda and the source of the Nile had inspired other expeditions to the region. In 1874, Henry Morton Stanley was making his own journey across the continent, 3 years after he'd found David Livingstone. His explorations left him convinced of Livingstone's argument that Christianity would improve the people's lives. Stanley wrote a plea to the Daily Telegraph. Oh, that a pious practical missionary would come here, who can teach people how to become Christians, cure their diseases, construct dwellings, and turn his hand to anything.
And Stanley's letter had the desired effect. In 1877, the trade routes from the coast brought a new kind of import across Lake Victoria: missionaries.
The arrival of missionaries in Buganda had profound implications for the kingdom and its rival. The missionaries discovered a country full of willing converts. Many chiefs believed the kingdom was in need of divine assistance. It had suffered military defeats in skirmishes with Bunyoro. Epidemics had struck without warning. King Mutesa was weak with disease. Those offering salvation were welcomed, whether European Protestants, Catholics, or Muslims from the coast. Religious conversion didn't result in peace and goodwill, however. Instead, it destabilized Buganda even further.
I'm on the outskirts of the capital city, Kampala, to witness one of the country's biggest annual Christian holidays, Martyrs' Day.
These pilgrims are commemorating the deaths of 22 Catholic martyrs, who in 1886 paid with their lives for choosing God over their king. Their executions were followed by those of 23 Protestants. The killings had been ordered by King Mwanga. He'd inherited a weakened monarchy after Mutesa's death. His assertion of authority was an attempt to control the religious factions that were now competing at Buganda's court. But Christianity had a significant following among Buganda's chiefs. They felt that Mwanga needed to be reined in. They turned to the British. At the same time, Protestant missionaries implored the British government to intervene in Buganda to prevent the loss of potential converts to Islam. The British were keen to extend their influence in East Africa and declared Buganda a protectorate in 1894.
The British benefited from Buganda's well-formed social and political structures as a means to rule. But this wasn't just the British taking advantage of Africans. Buganda realized that this was an extraordinary opportunity to ensure that they, rather than Bunyoro, were the most powerful kingdom in the region.
For the chiefs of Buganda, the alliance with the British was a marriage of convenience. Their new partners established themselves in a fort on Old Kampala Hill.
And so there was actually a flag that sat over a building on this site.
Yes.
A Union Jack.
The Union Jack, yes.
Historian Deo Kotono has analysed the relationship between the British and Buganda when the protectorate was established.
I think the protectorate was a benefit for both parties because for one part, for Buganda, it helped them to stabilize, to create a new foundation for the kingdom in Buganda. And then for the British, the declaration of a protectorate over Buganda laid the foundation for establishment of the colony over Uganda. So the benefit was on both sides. Yeah. The British gained on their part, and the Kingdom of Uganda gained also on their part.
In 1896, 2 years after signing the treaty with Buganda, the British extended the protectorate over the territory that would become Uganda. It included the Kingdom of Bunyoro. But Bunyoro's king, Kabalega, had no intention of cooperating. So the Buganda-British alliance launched a preemptive strike, with the British calling the shots.
It involves the majority of the soldiers are Buganda soldiers. So they use Buganda as a stepping stone now, as a springboard. They're using the personnel.
Yes.
They use the military system of Uganda to invade Bunyoro.
Isn't this humiliating for Buganda as well? Isn't this to be subservient to the British in this war?
No, it's not.
No?
No. It is an opportunity. Buganda looks at it as an opportunity to expand.
But I imagine that the long-term strategic aim of getting rid of the Bunyoro is completely obscuring the kind of the everything else.
Yes.
And they're actually losing sight of the fact that
they are being taken over,
yes.
that their country is being taken over by the British. They
Yes.
lose sight of that one.
Yes.
Buganda's chiefs were focused on ensuring their kingdom's supremacy over their rival. And they succeeded. During the violence, Bunyoro is thought to have lost 3/4 of its population. Tens of thousands were killed in action. Many more succumbed to famine or fled the country.
The deaths of such a staggering number of people decimated the kingdom, not just physically, but spiritually too. And for a kingdom that believed in its permanence in this environment, it was a brutal blow.
Bunyoro was crushed. But just when Buganda might have been expected to celebrate, its king made an astonishing decision. Mwanga realized he was little more than a puppet. He rebelled in 1897, joined forces with his arch-enemy, Kabalega, and waged war on the British. Their joint effort resulted in the two men being captured and exiled to the Seychelles in 1899. But in the centuries-old contest for supremacy, Buganda had emerged the victor. The British protectorate was named Uganda, and the British used administrators from Buganda to enforce the law across all the kingdoms of the nation. Many outside Buganda felt unfairly treated. The old rivalries would never die. In 1967, however, the kingdoms themselves did. Under the dictatorships of Milton Obote and Idi Amin, they ceased to exist for a generation. But while the kingdoms may have seemed dead, they weren't buried. They were reborn when Uganda's government sanctioned their restoration in 1993. In both Buganda and Bunyoro, there was common cause for celebration. The traditions such as Buganda's royal music were revived. All of Uganda's kingdoms had suffered during the turbulent years of the country's modern history.
But the fact that the culture and the history return with them quite so readily tells us how much these kingdoms continue to mean to the people.
Heading out into the garden here on BBC HD this evening at 9 with Winter Watch. That's after bees, butterflies and blooms coming up next.
John